This episode of the Managing Madrid podcast is brought to you by patreon.com/managing Madrid, where we did two bonus shows last week on Thursday and Friday, respectively, with Matt Wiltsey and Lucas Navarrete. That was a ton of fun. Thank you guys for joining in. You get at least two bonus shows per week over on patreon.com/managing Madrid, where we will be very active this upcoming season. A minimum of two shows, probably three, sometimes more. And if you were ever on the fence of becoming a member or not, I would say now is the time to do it, because before September 1st, if you do it, you'll be grandfathered in at a specific price. And if you don't do that, the prices go up September 1st. So if you're ever on the fence, we'd suggest to get in before September 1st. Go to patreon.com/managing Madrid. We'll grandfather you in before the price goes up. And we really look forward to seeing you on the inside and interacting with you guys. And it's an ever-growing Real Madrid family. If you're on YouTube or don't have Patreon in your country for whatever reason, you can simply hit join on the YouTube memberships tab of this channel, and it's the same content. All right, guys, it's been a while. We are back from a mini hiatus. Season is about to begin. We're going full steam ahead, and we're starting with a preview of the UEFA Super Cup against Atalanta tomorrow, and we're going to preview that. So stick around. Coming up, Atalanta preview. Let's get to it.
Nice article in the Managing Madrid blog. Wonderful lads that do a great job there. And worth reading about that man there. Karim Benzema needs to rest, and the numbers reveal why.
Times ended up almost looking like a 6-3-1. Some very good writing about that on the Managing Madrid website. First great podcast as well. Of course, Fede Valverde was a huge part of the equation.
Welcome, everyone, to the Managing Madrid podcast. It is August 13th. We are a day away from the European Super Cup. Real Madrid versus Atalanta. It's been a long time since Jose and I did these previews, but man, does it feel good to be doing these previews again with Jose. Jose is here. Welcome to the show. How you doing? You're on mute, Jose.
I was muted. So hello, Kian, and hello, everyone. Yes, it is nice to be back, because in a way, it's just an indication that the season is starting again, and we are back to, well, the usual grind, but also just back to the club season. In a way, I don't know. I'm kind of relieved to just go back to normal. It's been a good summer. We've had the Euros, we've had the Olympic Games, but it is kind of relaxing in a way to go back to the regular club football season.
You know, Jose, I had to really think about when was the last time I really tuned into anything Atalanta related, and how much do I really have to say about this team? We play them tomorrow. I'm so focused on us because we have a new superstar, Kylian Mbappe. Everyone's wondering if he's going to play tomorrow. How does this look? What does this look like? And then I was trying to think oh yeah, Atalanta. It felt like 10 years ago, but they had that Europa League final against Bayer Leverkusen and beat them 3-0. And Lookman had a hat trick. And I completely forgot about that. I was like, oh yeah, that was a big day. That was somehow the one time Bayer Leverkusen lost was at the very last game of the Europa League. And it was 3-0. And it was a complete shock. Is that where we start? Do you think that's where we start? Like Atalanta's previous season? Obviously, these Super Cup games are a little bit tricky to talk about because it's a continuation of the season prior, but it's also heading into the new season. Both teams have new players. There's also injuries. Where do you want to start with Atalanta?
I think the Europa League final is a pretty good place to start. The thing with Atalanta is that as long as Coach Gasperini is still in there, in many ways, the team tactically does not change that much. So it always this has ever since he took over in 2016, the formation and the system remain kind of the same, kind of a 3-4-3, which sometimes it's 3-4-1-2, sometimes is 3-4-2-1. But that in so many years, in 8 years since he took over, it hasn't really changed much. And it's still a team that presses high, man to man. that has been their signature. Very interesting possession game, tends to be like heavily attack you on the wings. But anyways, I say all this because tactically speaking, they haven't really changed that much. Like there have been smaller adjustments to get everything to work, but fundamentally the system remains the same. They did similar things against Bayer Leverkusen. The main thing that we can say is that this Atalanta side is probably not as, even though they won Europa League, I would say they're overall not as strong as they were like in their peak days, in that team that was almost competing for Serie A, like the one that had Papu Gomez, Ilicic, etc. They don't have such a strong attack now. They still have good attacking players like Charles de Ketelaere, like Lookman. Well, Scamacca is now injured, so he's not going to be around. But they still have good attacking players, but it's definitely a step down from their heyday. And if you look at a lot of their metrics, everything looks a bit worse than it was a few years ago. Like they concede a bit more, they don't score or shoot as much. So they've been more inconsistent than they were before. And that is partly why this Europa League run surprised everyone, because it seems like all the stars aligned. Scamacca went on like a really good finishing run that really helped boost Atalanta's chances. And they made it to fourth, and partly because of that scoring run, they also made it to fourth place on the Serie A table. So all in all, it was a very good second half of the year for an Atalanta that had been kind of inconsistent. We'll see how much can they keep this up this season.
So that previous team you were talking about, the Ilicic and then Papa Gomez, Zapata, like those guys, you remember?
Yes.
I think that was the last time we played them, and that was the
Yes.
Furlan Mendy right-footed shot from outside the box.
Yes.
Was it 2000?
2021? It was the last year of Zidane.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That I believe that was the last time we played them. So this team is obviously a lot different from that one. And I think when you look at their squad and their transfers, I mean, Scamacca is a huge miss. I think he's going to miss most of the season.
Yes.
With that, he's getting surgery. So they bring in Matteo Retegui from Genoa. I mean, obviously, like you just don't know how well he's going to be integrated and how quickly. And obviously, Scamacca is just a huge loss for them in general. Lookman, obviously, is kind of like the hero of the Europa League. What is it about him that you look at and think like Real Madrid need to worry about this aspect of him? Because you look at our center back thing, Militao is still trying to find his feet after returning. Some people are concerned about the Militao-Rudiger partnership because they are both very aggressive defenders. How do you see that playing out?
So I think what's interesting about this Atalanta side, Lookman is, I find him an interesting player because he does, I mean, and one of the things I like about Atalanta in general is that because of how they set up the team, the players always do a bit of everything. Like other teams has guys that are like very specifically creators and other guys who are very specifically runners. And the nice thing about Atalanta is that normally their players always do a bit of everything. Like there's always the striker roles. Scamacca, for example, was a bit more specific. But guys like Lookman and the Kettler, like they usually do a bit of everything. So sometimes if they need to run, they make the run. Sometimes if they need to make the pass, they make the pass. And I think that gives this side a lot of flexibility. So when we look at a guy like Lookman, the main threat is in a way that he can do a bit of everything, that he can that he can do some creative actions on the ball, but he can also be a threat running in behind. So it's I find it a bit hard to describe because what they will do is that they will try to find the weak spot and try to exploit it some way. Sometimes you can exploit it via passing, sometimes you can exploit them via running in behind. So if you have, say, two aggressive center backs, yeah, perhaps one of them is trying to get the pass in behind and the other one is trying to find the run. So but in general, they are like guys like Lukman and De Ketelaere are like over like general threats. Either they can either attack you like through some kind of creative move, dribble, or they can attack you by running in behind. So it's a bit of both, I would say.
So let's look at the Real Madrid side of things. And unfortunately, we are recording this before the press conferences and the training session today. So we are we don't get to see that added benefit of, if there's hints from Ancelotti in the press conference, all that stuff. The big question mark is really Mbappe, because we all know that Ancelotti has said in the past, back in 2022 when we won the Super Cup, he said that the Super Cup is a continuation of the league in the season prior. So the players who won the Champions League are the ones who deserve to play in that Super Cup game, because they are the ones who got the team this far. And so everyone's wondering, like, well, is Mbappe the exception to the rule? Because, you spent so many years trying to get this guy. He's finally arrived. Everyone is excited about him. He looks like he's going to be integrated in the team just fine. I know that's a very premature thing to say, but I like we just released a School of Real Madrid video about this today. Like, I think from a tactical fit, this will be pretty seamless in a lot of ways, because the Mbappe profile is so versatile and so good at linking up with his teammates in attack that I think this is going to work really well. And obviously, the training sessions look pretty fun and entertaining as well. So we don't know necessarily whether he'll start or not, and if he doesn't, this is very possible that he'll come in the second half. The Real Madrid side, Jose, is I guess we can kind of get into predicting the lineups, all that stuff. What did you see there from a Real Madrid perspective of starting lineups, and how Real Madrid will approach this, and how should they approach this? And also, will Atalanta approach this game the way they usually approach games, or will they be more conservative than they usually are?
I think from Atalanta's side, I can say right away that there's not going to be much adjusting to anyone. They have never adjusted to anyone. Like, other than minor adjustments, the style and the approach has rarely varied. So they're going to go at Real Madrid with a very similar. Well, if we look at, say, what they fielded in the final against Bayer Leverkusen, it's going to be quite similar. Let's see. Musso at goal. Yes, the back three, Jim City, Hin and Kolasinac. That's going to be the same. I'm reading just off like the lineup against Bayer Leverkusen. Double pivot. This one's going to vary, because right now there's a transfer saga with Teun Koopmeiners, who might leave for Juventus. So instead of him, I imagine that Martin de Roon might start, but yeah, and he was injured before, but I need to check that. But I would imagine that he's the one who would start in that case next to Ederson. Wing back, Zappacosta and Ruggeri. And I would say that up front, you'd had Lukman, Charles de Ketelaere, and then instead of Scamacca, most likely you'd have Retegui. Another experiment that could happen there is that instead of now to replace Scamacca, and instead of Retegui, you'd have someone like Pasalic. And so if he wanted to do like a more defensive adjustment, then you would have a guy like Pasalic who, let's just say, he knows the system a bit better, and then he can press and defend more in the way that Gasperini would like to do. So you would kind of replace an out-and-out striker with kind of an attacking midfielder type. And I think that's the one adjustment I could see Atalanta doing. And then from Real Madrid's perspective, I'm also kind of wondering what will be the lineup, because I think, well, at center back, we don't have too many options, and the center backs have been playing. So I think that one's quite clear. Like, center backs and keeper are quite clear. Defensive line in general, I don't think we'll have any major surprises. I think it's a bit of what's the state? Like, in what state has everyone returned from their holidays? Where are they in their preseason and getting up to speed? And depending on that, I think we'll see some names or others. Because, like, to give an example, like, I wouldn't be surprised if you even had someone like Brahim starting, simply because he's already had like plenty of preseason action, for example.
Yeah. Well, this is Jose. This is the first game in the post-Cruz, post-Nacho era. So we are without these guys for the first time in like a decade. And if we go by the rule of the starting 11 is the same as the Champions League final, well, there are two players missing from that, and that's Cruz and Nacho. Now, Chouameni did not play that final because he was injured, so that is one pretty easy, just like replacement. You can go Chouameni for Cruz, and then Camavinga goes to left CM. Fede goes to right CM where he already was, and then Nacho obviously started that final too, and Militao is back now too. So you could talk yourself into the idea that the starting lineup is the same as the Champions League final, but Chouameni replaces Cruz, and Militao replaces Nacho. I don't know if you had a chance to watch much preseason, but one of the cool like little wrinkles was that this idea of Arda Guler playing in a deeper role and playing in midfield, and I don't think he's gonna start this game, but I was just curious to get your thoughts on that if you watched preseason, or at least if you didn't, maybe just the idea of it. And the other thing is, I think your point about like players like Brahim maybe playing is valid because it's not just about what the best starting lineup is. There are a bunch of players who have played all those US preseason games. They're a little bit more further along in terms of the fitness regimen heading into the season. So there's a case for that too. But yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Goulier thing in midfield. Did you keep an eye on this at all?
A bit. So I didn't watch all of the preseason games, but I did notice and I think that's one. The team hasn't experimented that much. There's also been like the Mario Martin experiment, which that one I
Yes.
didn't see. That one I didn't see coming. But that and probably Arda Guler playing deeper were some of the things that surprised me most. Also, I mean, this is not new, but I feel like we saw a very flexible front three like throughout these games, like a lot of movement. Brahim was all over the place, and I mean we've been doing that for a while, but this one looks somehow even more especially because I think before only certain players had that flexibility. Right now it's nice to see guys like Guler or like Brahim also just move around throughout wherever the system needs them to. So I thought that one was quite interesting. With Guler, I think now, of course, now that Kroos is gone, we are going through the whole phase of who's going to be the creative passer. And of course, Modric is going to fill in that role sometimes, but he cannot fill that. Like he cannot take all the he cannot do all the minutes that Kroos played. So you need someone else to do that creative passing. And one of the most interesting stories of this season will be which Real Madrid player steps up to become kind of the passing leader, to put it that way. Like, because there are players like, say, Fede, who are at a level of maturity where they could start taking, or Tchouaméni, who could start taking on some of those functions. Camavinga probably is the one who's technically best suited for a role like this, but again, sometimes he has his inconsistencies with passing. So for me, it's interesting because there are a lot of candidates who can take on that role, but one that I did not see coming is that, oh, maybe you could use like Arda Guler's creative talents, like in a deeper role, more as an 8. So I did, like, since the moment he was signed, that was a possibility. I have to admit that I was not expecting that we were going to start testing that. I thought it was going to take longer before we started testing that, but I guess the hole left by Kroos gives room for more experiments. So I don't know if we will. I still don't, like, the only time we'll know if this is actually going to be a thing is once the real game starts. So we'll see what happens. But I see the value in it. I mean, we have a player with a lot of creativity, with magnificent ball striking, and he can have a lot of impact with those things. He can get passes from deep areas that, it is true, maybe other players in our midfield cannot do. So I see where the value is. But then there are other things like I don't know, defensive work rate, also, if you move him too far back, then he's not going to have as much impact in the final third, which is where you want him to have the most impact. So there's a bunch of things that I think we will only discuss if we start seeing him more often in that role.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And with Guler, does it hurt his impact in the final third if he plays in a deeper role?
Mhm.
And I think what's interesting about him is that he is very mobile. Like even in these preseason games,
Yes.
regardless of where he is on the field, like on paper in the starting 11, he covers a lot of ground. Like he will drop really deep to help escape pressure, and he'll play those vertical passes. But he'll also, seconds later, this is kind of like the Fede aspect of it too that I think he has to him. Seconds later, he'll be in the final third. He'll be on the right wing, and he'll be creating. And I think he's just a really interesting profile because of his mobility and his decision making. And doesn't mean he has to be just a deeper midfielder the entire time, but I think there's going to be moments where he has to drop deep and he can help the team in that situation. I do think, and for all the valid concern that there is no other Cruz, you can't replace him. He is irreplaceable. He's Tony Cruz. There are a few players in the squad that can take on the mantle of just being able to control the tempo. Modric is obviously one, not one you would say to take the mantle because he's 39, but someone who can obviously do that even at his age. But Guler, and the other one is Bellingham, I think. Like in terms of controlling tempo, it'll be really interesting what his role will be this season. Will he take on a deeper role, or will he stay in the attacking kind of trio, or will Rodrigo start and Bellingham will play deeper? I think that'll be interesting to keep an eye on too.
Yeah,
I didn't
I
want
agree.
to. Yeah, go ahead.
And I also think I also feel like Guler having like a bit more like pausa when he plays, because it is true that Bellingham tends to be like more of a come and go player, and when he plays, like he will pass forward. I feel like Guler sometimes has a bit more pause, but all in all, it's like a fairly exciting time to watch all these Real Madrid young players, because all of them, like you see Guler, Brahim, Bellingham, Vinny, Rodrigo, like Endrick, like all of these guys kind of thrive when they're given like a lot of room to move around wherever they feel they feel it's best. And Ancelotti is quite happy in giving them that freedom. So it is interesting to see what comes out of it, because sometimes like other teams usually work on there's this guy in the team who's allowed to have freedom, and then the rest kind of have to stay in their positions. Here Ancelotti seems quite happy to give all the forwards a lot of freedom.
Yes, yeah. There is definitely. I mean, that's what makes it so fun too, because all these players, if you give them the freedom, I think they're also smart enough to just come
Yes.
up with some really interesting attacking sequences. So I did want to take a quick question from one of our YouTube members, Rishi, who says, "Hello guys, are you worried about the lack of depth at the center back position?" I don't think you and I have talked about this, so I'm very curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yes. So I mean, we're taking a risk. That's the summary of it. So is this gonna be, so in the end it's like, is this gonna be the problem that is gonna get in the way of our season? We don't know, because for all we know, Rudiger might be somehow able to do another 4 to 5,000 minutes this year. Of course, if Rudiger breaks down, which would be kind of logical after like a bunch of seasons of playing continuously, then we are in a lot of trouble. So I do have concerns about it. I would have liked us not to take that. We are like one injury away from playing Tchouaméni at center back, which again, he can do the job there. I just prefer to have him at 6. So all in all, I am concerned about the lack of depth. I wish the club did something to address that. I don't think we'll see. If there's an injury, it's going to be catastrophic. But I don't think it's catastrophic right now, but it could become catastrophic if we somehow continue to have bad luck and get another major injury.
It's a huge risk. Like Matt and I were talking, we were recording a podcast and I think it was Friday. And we were just about to get into like Jean Martinez and how much we're impressed with him. And then the news broke that he tore his ACL. and it was so devastating because we spent so much time just in awe of him in preseason, and seeing him up close was really special. Like, he did not look like a 16-year-old at all. And so that, like, and look, I'm not saying that he would have been a key factor this season. I don't think that was the plan, but certainly, like, there would have been times where he would have been called up, and having him and Castilla just an arm's length away to be called up in certain situations would have been really useful. But I do think uh it's a risk, and the Chouameni center back thing, I think it has different ramifications too. There's a domino effect of Chouameni playing center back, which is
Yes.
Kamavinga plays every game as the six, which means like everyone just plays like gets run into the ground. Like, and so that kind of worries me a bit. It's like, okay, Chouameni doesn't like playing center back, but if he has to play there sometimes, that's okay. But if he has to play there a lot due to injuries, and then Kamavinga has to play every single game as the six, and I think that just kind of has a trickle down effect of
Yes.
everyone's going to be spread a little bit thin, and that part of it worries me. Like, I've said this a million times, but Nacho played over 1,700 minutes last season, and like he's not there anymore. Like, that's can't tell me that Nacho's role, like that role in the squad, is not incredibly necessary. Like, you need a Nacho, and we don't have that this year. So that worries me. I think there's a lot of people, Jose, who are um, on this thing where, like, this is Real Madrid, this is our policy. Like, don't worry. Like, last year we didn't replace Benzema, and we won the Champions League and La Liga. Like, you got to have faith in the squad, and I do. I just don't. Again, like, I think the Nacho role is incredibly important, and you just don't have that anymore, and that worries me.
Yeah, it's a bit I don't know, I feel like a bit like when my when my mom decides that she doesn't want to spend on something even though she has the money, and it's like why would you make your life more complicated unnecessarily? And that's a bit how I feel about the center back situation here. It's like, it's not like financially the club is in such a situation that they really have to suffer through this, but they've chosen not to. And I understand that we have a transfer model with some constraints, and those constraints a lot of the time have been good and have put us in the position that we are in, but there are limits. And this is the situation where I just look at it and I'm like, why do we have to suffer through this? Why do we have to run this risk when there were other moves that could be done? You could still, there were other options aside from Lenny Yoro. And yeah, so
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Like, look, I think this squad has so much firepower that it may not matter by the end of the season. Like,
exactly.
you're just so good that you're fine, and everything goes according to plan, and there's no injuries to the back line, and it wasn't a big deal, and everyone will say, "Look, we told you so." But I think, but it's exactly what you said. It's just a risk. That's it. It's you're putting yourself in a very risky situation. If you do get, one or two injuries in the back line, and all of a sudden it's Rudiger and Chouameni, just those two for like 1 month straight. It's a risk, and that's all. Any other concluding thoughts about Atalanta, Super Cup, anything else? We got the press conference starting in, I think, a couple hours or so.
Yeah.
So we'll cover that later, but is there anything else?
Yeah, the only thing, I expect a good version of Atalanta tomorrow, because I do feel like a game like this is still more special to them than it is than it is to us. So I do kind of expect them to be on their game. They've been kind of inconsistent throughout the last year, but I would expect them to be a bit more like on like Europa League final form than, say, when they lost against Cagliari earlier, like a few months before. So it's I expect a good version of Atalanta. I think also their style, which is very intense, very physical, can be a bit, well, it'll be tougher for them to execute, but it's also tougher for a team that's like coming back from preseason. So they're gonna make you sweat. So we'll see. We'll also see like at what point in preseason Real Madrid is, and how can they handle that. And it will be also a very interesting test, like for the post Kroos era, because Now you don't have Kroos, and you have to deal with what's going to be a pretty annoying press. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how we deal with that now that we don't have Kroos. Who deals with it? Who's the one, and who are the ones who are going to have an impact? Because I am kind of not expecting Camavinga to start. He would be normally my go-to person for how to get out of a pressing situation. So it'll be interesting to see how the other midfielders deal with it.
Our track record in Super Cups, apart from that one against Atletico, which we lost, I think, in extra time, is pretty good. And if we win tomorrow, that moves us to 6 Super Cup titles, which would be the most. Because right now, I think we're tied with Milan and Barca for that. So hopefully, we get to talk about a 6th European Super Cup victory. Hopefully, we get to see Mbappe's first few minutes, and it's magical. We're rooting for all that stuff to happen. We'll be back tomorrow night after the game. And then we got Thursday and Friday shows over on patreon.com/managing Madrid and for our YouTube members. So again, like we said at the top of the show, please sign up to make sure you have access to those. Jose, we'll talk off air about more preview podcasts coming up. And it's great to have you back on the show, man.
It's great to be back. And yes, looking forward to the season. So thanks, Kian, and see you all around.